Namaste everyone and welcome to part 2 of The Student and the Scholar. Yes, it is Wisdom Wednesday and I hope you're all excited as much as I am. Before we like to begin, I would like to start off with one Om and then go into the Gayatri Mantra. So, Om Bhurabhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Thank you all. So, I'd like to introduce myself. So, my name is Mithali and I am part of NHSF's National Committee and currently on the South Zone campus team. So, I am also studying pharmacy in my final year at the Reading University. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. So part 2 of The Students and the Scholar. So why are we here? Why are we all watching? So the idea of The Students and the Scholar all came about when students, just like myself, are always inquiring or continuously quizzing ourselves about what our Dharma, what our Hindu philosophy is all about. So we came up with this Students and the Scholar, and hopefully we can bridge the gap between those ideas of what our Hindu Dharma is all about. So the Scholar. I'd like to introduce you Adityaji Gurtu. Before I begin, I would like to do a small parichay for those who couldn't join. So Adityaji Gurtu completed his Masters in Engineering at the University of Bristol, where he was also the president of the Hindu Society there. He gained his other Masters at the Cambridge University, and then he decided to quit his job and fulfill his desire in knowing more about our Hindu Dharma and philosophy, and so decided to go to Bharat. He spent a year backpacking, meeting various masters, and ended up living at the banks of Ganga River, where he met a monk and a scholar, Swami Dayananda Saraswati Ji. And so he lived with him for 3 years in the forests of South India, studying the Vedantas, various philosophy, Sanskrit, learning more about meditation and puja. He then decided to return to the UK and now currently works as a project manager for the TFL, but voluntarily also teaches classes on Sanskrit and various Hindu philosophies. So Adityaji, namaste.
Namaste.
And also we have our students. So Khushbu Karia, she is a member of the Central Zone campus team on NHSF National Committee and is currently studying economics at the University of Nottingham. Namaste, Khushbu.
Namaste.
And finally, we also have Milan Nagum, who's currently London Zone's coordinator on the campus team at NHSF National Committee, and recently graduated with a chemistry degree at University of Sheffield. Namaste, Milan.
Namaste.
So this webinar, we're going to go through various questions that is going to be given from Khushbu and Milan to our scholar, and various different discussions are going to take place. The exchange will continue around till 7:30, where we will have around 10 minutes to answer questions for anyone that has tuned in. So please, please, please comment below. Share the link as well for those who can't make it. Also, like it, love it. We want to know everything. And yeah, please do put any questions that you guys may have. And then at the end, there'll be final takeaways as well. So without further ado, Khushbu, it's all over to you.
Thank you for that, Mitali. So of course, last week we ran through the origin of the Vedas and we discussed like the Vedangas, the Upavedas, the Upangas, and we looked through the structure of the Vedas, and we also covered who created these teachings, so our rishis. So I guess naturally, the first question that follows from there is, how do we build on this knowledge that we obtained last week, and what would be important for us to learn about next?
Hariom, thank you for your question. Yes, so there are many basic principles which underlie all of these teachings which you see on the screen and we saw last week, all of which are rooted in the Vedas. So this is the Vedic Hindu scriptural structure that we saw. One of the key underlying theoretical principles, which I think is really useful for everyone to be clear on and know more about, which underpins not only the Vedas, but the Buddhist teachings, the Agamas, the Jain teachings, all of the Hindu sphere of teachings, the Indian philosophical teachings. And that principle is the law of karma. So the law of karma is the topic which I would like to introduce today.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there's this law of karma, and by the law of karma, do you mean the Western concept of karma? So how what goes around comes around?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I suppose that's a phrase that we often hear: "What goes around comes around," and it does. It is something like that. So the law of karma is the law of cause and effect, and the reason we call it a law is it's just like the law of gravity, for example. You know, gravity is a universal principle that applies to everyone and everywhere. Hence, we call it a law. It's not something that's created by any one individual, and gravity always existed even before it was discovered, right, as a principle. Similarly, with the law of karma, it's a very basic principle of how this universe works, of how life works. And so that law of karma is effectively that every cause has an effect. Now, the law of karma is spoken of in the Vedic teachings. So in this chart that you see in front of you, if you see the box in green at the top with red text called Veda, so the Vedas were the texts, the knowledge revealed by our rishis. And I'm going to quote to you a mantra from the Yajurveda. So if you see below the Veda, one of the four is called Yajurveda. So I'm going to quote a mantra which talks about this law of karma. And this mantra is within the Yajurveda. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.4.5. Sadhukari sadhu bhavati, papakari papo bhavati, punyaha punyena karmana bhavati, papaha papena, yata kamo bhavati, tat krituhu bhavati, yat krituhu bhavati, tat karma kurute, yat karma kurute, tat api sampadyate. So this is a mantra which is essentially explaining that every action has a result. And I've tried to formulate the content of this mantra and expand upon it in a diagram. So I'll explain what that mantra is through a diagram. So if we could just move to the next slide. So hopefully everyone can see that on their screens. So I've sketched up this diagram which illustrates the law of karma. So we'll start on the left-hand side. Yeah, we'll go box by box and I'll very briefly explain what each thing is. So it all starts with the doer of action. Yeah, the one who does the action, which obviously is me. I do action, right? So the word karma means action. Yeah, so I am the doer of action. Or in this case, yourself, the person listening. And the doer of action is always a conscious being. Yeah, it's not, the doer of action isn't like a rock, an inert piece of stone or something. Okay, so moving on, the doer of action does an action, right? So that's the next box you can see in green, yeah? The word for action in Sanskrit is karma. Now, there are various types of action. So if we go beneath the action box, you can see there are 3 boxes. Yeah. So physical action is a type of action, verbal action is a type of action, and mental action is a type of action. So physical means, I think that's the obvious one, using your body to do things. You're walking, you're moving, you're lifting things, you're going places. That's what we mean by physical. Verbal is obviously in the form of words. So, I'm speaking right now. So that also is considered an action, even though I may not be moving my body, but I'm still talking, right? So that's also a karma, technically speaking, as per our law of karmic system. And also, even mental action is a karma. So this is a very interesting one, because people, when we say the word action, people generally don't think that mental activity is an action. Generally, people only think of physical activity as action, right? And so when we say mental activity, we mean thoughts, feelings, intentions. All of that is technically an action. So the key takeaway here is that don't forget that even when you think something, even you may be sitting there, in meditation and you're not saying anything, you're quiet, but there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of rumination, a lot of thoughts running through your head. So even that is a karma. So don't think you're not doing karma. You're still doing karma, even if you're thinking and feeling. And then obviously following on from action, so going back to the boxes on the top, the green box, yeah, so we spoke about the 3 types of karma, and every type of karma, every type of action has a result. So this link between an action and result, or in other words, in modern scientific terms, cause and effect. So these 3 boxes roughly summarize the basic law of karma, which is every action has a result.
That's really interesting, Adityaji. So just from in the action box, how come you've put mental at the top and then physical and verbal branching from both of those?
Yeah, the reason for that is that if you observe yourself, so don't take this as the theory, let's look at this actually, your actual experience of the world. When you do a physical action or you say words, very subtly, if you look, you can see that every single physical and verbal action that you do is preceded by a thought or an intention or a feeling. So for example, I'm talking right now, but these words that are coming out they firstly arise in my mind in the form of thoughts, yeah, or feelings, my feeling compels me to do something, or my intention, my intention to say something. So intention is not a physical object, right? What is intention? Intention is in the form of thoughts, in the form of mind. So this is why actually of everything, all the 3 types of karma action, it is actually mental action, which is primary, and the other 2 are secondary. And this is why intention behind an action is so important.
Okay, cheers. Yeah, that does shed quite a bit of light on that, actually. And then I guess that leads me on to, naturally, how do you define a good or a bad action?
Yeah, this is a very important question, which is key in the law of karma and dharma. So rather than me giving my wording, I'm going to quote a very famous Sanskrit verse, which beautifully summarizes the answer to the question that you've asked. And the verse goes like this. Ashtadasha Puraneshu Vyasasya Vachanadvayam Paropakara Punyaya Papaya Parapidanam. So what it's saying is Ashtadasha Puraneshu Vyasasya Vachanadvayam. If you look at all of the Puranas, all of the scriptures, millions and millions of verses, we just saw the chart before, so many different verses, scriptures, very confusing, right? But if you wanted to summarize the meaning of all the scriptures in just 2 sentences, Vachanadvayam, how would you summarize it? So the next line says, Paropakara Punyaya Papaya parapidanam. So what it says here is that para upakara, helping others, is a good action. Parapidanam, harming others, is a bad action. Now, obviously, they don't use the word, these are English words, good and bad. They have their own terms, punya and papa, which we'll come and see in a minute. But essentially, a good action is that which helps others, that which is rooted in compassion. So when we say helping others, obviously that means it's born of a certain kindness, right? You wouldn't help others unless there's a certain kindness, a certain compassion. So compassionate actions which help others would be considered dharmic, whereas actions where you intend to harm others, which are born of hate, actions born of anger, these are considered not such good actions. Hence, you can see the two colored boxes on the right-hand side, which says helps others and harms others.
Thank you for that. So obviously we just saw that some actions are harmful and others help others. But what are the different results of these actions? What happens next? So you've done an action, what's next?
Yeah, so if we carry on looking at our flow chart, so we got to the point where we saw result of action, that box. Now, as you say, what happens next? So you do an action which helps someone, you do an action which harms someone. There are two basic types of results that are spoken of by the rishis. The first type is the top box, which says seen. So in Sanskrit, we call it drishta. So seen results of action. So drishta literally means, it comes from the root to see. So drishta literally means that which is seen. The second type of result is called unseen. In Sanskrit, we call it adrishta. Yeah, so that's the box beneath. Now, just starting with drishta, the top one, the green one. Let's take an example of an action, a mental action. So say you get angry at someone and you're so angry that you shout some abuse at that person, right? So that anger is a feeling, right? And according to our chart we just saw, even feelings and thoughts are actions, right? And also shouting at someone is a verbal action. So this is a karma, you've done a karma. Now, when you get angry and shout at someone, what's the effect of that on your own mind? You think yourself, what's the effect? What happens to your mind? So, you may feel disturbed, you feel restless, afterwards you might feel guilty, oh, I shouldn't have said that, you feel sad, later on, or at that time you feel frustrated, confused. So all of these negative mental states arise, yeah, and you can see that straight away, yeah? You can observe that in yourself immediately. And so because you can see that result, these are called seen results. This is why these types of results of that action of shouting at someone would be classified as drishtapala. So that's the result that you can see immediately, the obvious result. It's not only mental negative results that come out of that. Even physically, when you get angry, if you observe yourself, maybe your face gets red, your breathing gets shorter and sharper, right? When you're angry, you might start sweating. Some people physically start trembling. So it not only has mental seen results, it has physical seen results. And all of this stuff happens immediately. And then obviously the person to whom you've got angry at and shouted at, you can also see the results on them. They might be crying, they'll feel hurt, they're upset. So do you see, these are the obvious drishta, seen results of the action of getting angry and shouting at someone. So it's very interesting because even at this seen level, even in this example, you can see how an action which harms others, actually you harm yourself. You're creating your own suffering, right? So I know maybe it sounds obvious to some people, but it's really important to be mindful of the actions we do, the thoughts and feelings we have for others and ourselves, and the impact of the types of thoughts and feelings. So if we have anger, it causes one to suffer. If you have a jealous feeling, it causes suffering. if there's a feeling of pride, it results in suffering. So all of these negative mental karmas and states cause suffering. The second, so moving on from seen results, that's just one example. The second type of result is unseen. So this unseen result is in addition to the seen result. And this unseen result is spoken of in our scriptures and by our rishis.
Thank you, Adityaji. That's really interesting, actually. I'd never thought about it as seen and unseen results of action. So I guess that really pushes me on to ask, what are the results of unseen actions?
Yeah, so with unseen actions, first of all, the word is actually adrishta. So these are the way we know about these unseen actions, because one may ask immediately, hang on, there's a result of an action which I can't see. So how do we know it exists? How do we even know it's there, right? So the way we know about unseen actions is because this is the revelation of the rishis. This is what is taught by the rishis. So if we remember from last week, rishis are basically very, very pure-minded, great masters who have done a lot of meditation. So their perception has become very, very subtle. So those who do a bit of meditation can appreciate the more you do, the more subtle one's perception becomes. You start to perceive things which maybe you've never seen before or noticed before, but were always there. So these rishis in their meditations and in the Vedas have had these perceptions and understood that there's something such as an unseen result of an action, which we would never know about otherwise. And therefore, unseen results are based on trust in the word of the rishis. And that's where this knowledge comes from. So essentially, it is a belief. Unseen results are a belief, but they're a logical belief. There's a lot of logic to support. And also it's based on trust in the rishis. So that's just addressing the point of how do we know unseen results are even there? A second point, just covering that as well. It's not that you have to see everything to know it exists. So a simple example of this is space. I mean, do you see space? Does space have a color? Does space have a sound? Does space have a taste? Is it sweet tasting or sour tasting? Can you grab it with your hand? So no, I mean, space is not available for perception through your 5 organs of knowledge, through your sense organs. But at the same time, everyone knows, of course there's space. I mean, everything exists within space, obviously. So it's just an example of how just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So similarly with unseen results, just because you can't see them doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So very briefly, moving on in the flowchart, there are 2 types of unseen result. The first type we call punya. So punya is a type of unseen result which comes from actions which help others. So we saw before, compassionate actions which help others are considered good. And these generate something called punya, which you can't see, right? Conversely, actions which harm others generate an unseen result, which in the scriptures and the rishis have called papa, which is the second box below. So punya and papa are constantly being generated day to day through the actions that we do. And all of these punyas and papas, they all accrue, they all accumulate for each one of us continuously every day.
Okay, interesting. So I think what comes to mind is, if punya and papa are unseen, does it really matter? And I guess, how does it affect me?
Yeah.
And does it matter how much punya and papa I have?
Absolutely, very, very good question. So Exactly. If you know, even if there are these unseen results called punya papa, so what? You know, how does that impact me in my daily life? So this is where the feedback loop, the big arrow going back to the doer of action, comes in the diagram. So punya and papa, it's kind of like a bank account. This is kind of my own analogy. It's almost like you earn punya and you earn papa. You know, like you go to your job and you earn money, and then money accrues in your account, right? It accumulates. Every month you get your paycheck. So similarly, every day you're doing various actions, you know, which are helping others or harming others in different proportions. And according to the actions you do, you accumulate punya and papa. And this accumulates in a kind of bank account in your name, in the name of the one who did the action, yeah? But you can't see this bank account, right? But this punya and papa bank account eventually has to pay out. So how does it pay out? It pays out in the form of pleasant and unpleasant experiences in my daily life later on. Yeah, this is later. So at some point in the future, these punyas and papas will manifest in my life in the form of situations which are helpful and conducive to my happiness. So punya manifests as situations which are conducive to happiness, and papa manifests in the form of situations which cause me problems, which cause me obstacles, which cause me suffering. So another nice example or way to think of it, think of punya and papa like seeds. So imagine you plant an apple seed. You planted an apple seed in November, but when you look in your garden today, only today it started sprouting, right? It's taken several months for that seed to sprout. It didn't sprout straight away. You couldn't even see it for the last several months. So over time, when the time is right for the seed to sprout, when the soil conditions are right, when the temperature is right, when the season is right, when the water content is right, when the conditions are conducive, the seed will manifest into a plant. So similarly, punya and papa are like seeds, which you can't see, but they will manifest when the time comes, yeah? When the external situation is ripe for that, and it will come in the form of happiness and suffering.
Thank you for that, Adityaji. It was really interesting to see how your actions actually manifest into results and then forth like whatever happens with them. But in reality, we actually see that many people do actions that harm others and therefore have but they still live a like lavish life until they die, and we know this because they have died. So does that mean that they've essentially gotten away with all their pap?
Yeah, so this is where, without the law of karma, things just don't make sense. So that's a very, that's a very common question, because you're right, it doesn't make sense. It seems like some people literally do get away with murder. You know, that's the expression, but literally, you know, someone could murder someone and not be caught by the police, right? So the seen impact of that crime that they've done, they haven't really paid for it, right? You might think it's not fair, and it is, you're right, it's not fair. But according to the law of karma, everything is fair. So they will eventually experience the effect of that harmful action that they've done. And that is exactly the law of karma. You can't get away with it. So all that's happened for such people is that clearly they've accrued some papa, right? Some negative unseen result, and they haven't experienced that papa yet. And so this is where the idea of reincarnation comes in. Because if you die, as you say, and still in your bank account, you've still got some remaining punya and papa, right? How is that going to manifest? Because you've died. Therefore, it's a very key principle in Indian philosophy, the principle of rebirth. This is exactly why we have the principle of rebirth. And in fact, the very cause for taking a birth is to exhaust your punya and papa, because the only way you're going to kind of cash in on that punya papa, or the only way in which that punya and papa will sprout, is in the form of experience. You have to go through the suffering, or you have to go through the pleasure. There's no other way. The only way to exhaust is through experience. And if you don't have a physical body, how are you going to experience, right? So you need to take a physical body. Hence, we say you'll take another birth. And this is the concept of rebirth. So rebirth one can be born in any form, you know, as a human, as an animal, as an insect. There are even other spheres of existence if they're really there. You can be born in those. So there are many forms in which one can be born, and you're born into a form which is conducive for the manifestation of the particular set of punya and papa, which is ripe, you know? So it's very mathematical in a way, you know? So they don't get away with it, is the upshot of it. And there's a beautiful quote in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 27, which talks about rebirth. It says, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityuhu, dhruvam janma mritasya cha. So here he says, for the one who is born, you're definitely going to die, right? Obviously, everyone knows that. But then he says, for the one who dies, you're definitely going to be born. So that's what he means. He means rebirth.
Yes, it was really interesting how you touched on the law of karma being mathematical. So I guess I have a question about the weighting of the action. So does one good action outweigh, for example, 10 bad actions? So
remember that action isn't only physical. So going back to our action box, you've got physical, verbal, and mental. So obviously we think of action as very physical, but even your intention behind the action, that is really what is primary. So it's very difficult to place a kind of unit of action, you know, to say this is one unit of action and it outweighs 10 units of other actions. But it's directly proportional to the thought and feeling behind the action, and of course the effort you put into the action. So obviously it's hard to quantify, but as one example of something I've read in one scripture, I think it comes in Yoga Vashishta, it says, interestingly, that just a few minutes of practicing compassion meditation, yeah, there's a special meditation technique called Maitri, where we radiate goodwill and good feeling to others. And it says just a few moments of radiating goodwill and good feeling to others, right? It's a mental action, yeah? It's a mental action. That is worth more than hundreds of rituals. You earn more punya from that than you do then from hundreds of rituals. This is what it says in the text. So you do get these statements here and there. But I think the key point in that example is that it just shows how important it is to have an attitude of kindness behind actions. That really contributes to seen results, which are positive here and now. You feel good, right? When you're kind, you feel good, you feel happy, other people feel happy, your actions fall into place. And it also contributes to the generation of punya, which will later on fructify in your life as, you know, happy, good, healthy situations. And so that's really one of the big takeaways, I suppose, that we should always try to be compassionate in our actions. And that should be the intention behind our actions.
Adityaji, now that you've covered the slide fairly briefly and added some details to some of the boxes, we're going to go to some of the Facebook Live questions. So one question from Avanish was, what happens if you do good actions for the wrong reasons?
Interesting question, right? So it's like a good example of that is someone who does charity. Yeah, you give a massive donation, which is great. You know, that is a good action, right? It's helping others, no doubt. But the motive behind you doing charity is that you want your name on the front of the building. You know, this building was sponsored by XXX. So it's kind of motivated by ego, it's motivated by pride, but at the same time, in that pride, you're helping others. So it's not totally compassionate, it's not totally selfless action, right? It's not genuinely selfless action, but at the same time, you are helping others. So what would happen, I suppose, is that you get a mixture of punya and papa. There's going to be some punya, definitely, but also maybe not necessarily papa that you'd get for that, but just the feeling of pride on a seen result level. So forget unseen result. When you have pride, it causes a lot of division in the mind. It causes a lot of strain. You have to protect your ego. You're open to getting hurt. It causes a lot of suffering, actually, pride. So just on the level of seen result, that pride is not conducive for happiness. And so it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Thank you for that. So the second question that we have comes from Seven, who asks if you could comment on the diagram with regard to the injunction of the Bhagavad Gita, which is to act without regard to the fruits of our action.
Yeah, what that says, so there's a shloka, there's one verse in the Gita, it says, Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. So in there, they say, Karmani eva adhikarahate. It says in this diagram, you see the action box, yeah? So the second green box from the left, the action box. Krishna says in the Gita that Karmani eva adhikarahate. You only can control your actions. Ma phaleshu. You cannot control the result. Do you see it says karma phala? He actually uses the word ma phala. You cannot control the result. It's like, once you've sown the seed, you know, it will sprout. It will have an effect. You can't stop it. It will have an effect. But what you can control is the action, because you're the one doing the action. So if you look on the far left, who does action? You are responsible for your actions, right? Only you do it. No one else is responsible for your actions. I am responsible for my own mental states. We can't blame anyone for the way we feel. Actually, I am responsible. If I get angry, I make myself suffer. You know, you can't say, oh, you made me angry, so I'm suffering because of you. Actually, that's a bit of a fallacious statement. Actually, the fact is, you have a choice. You don't have to get angry. You can train your mind through mindfulness. We have meditation techniques and methods where you can train yourself. If you're very, very self-aware, you can actually stop the anger from arising, or you don't cling to it as much. And therefore, you do have a choice. There is a freedom in choice, but it requires a lot of mindfulness. And this is why the practical aspect of this theoretical diagram is that one must become more self-aware through meditation practices, which are taught also in the tradition. And there are many practices which help us become more self-aware. And this self-awareness basically cuts this whole cycle. This is what the Gita talks about. So there's one other shloka in the Gita, which I've got a quote here, chapter 4, verse 19. It says, Jnana Agni Dagda Karmana. So Dagda Karmanam, to burn all your karmas, Jnana Agni. You use the fire of awareness. So it's like you burn, you know, you offer something into a fire, you offer some wood into a fire and it burns. So similarly, awareness, your own awareness is compared to the fire here. So if you're aware of your mental feelings and sensations and thoughts and actions, it actually liberates you from the karma. And this is the deeper message in the Gita.
Thank you very much, Adityaji. I think in the interest of time, we will move on to our final question. So you've obviously covered the law of karma and explained the relevance and importance of it in our everyday lives. I guess in the flowchart, actually, you've got the arrows going back and forth and round. How do we kind of break out of this cycle?
Yeah, so this is the topic which is a big topic of discussion. And this is what we call moksha, liberation. So there's a lot of discussion by the rishis on how we can liberate ourselves from this bondage of karma. And also this is the topic exclusively dealt with in the Upanishads as well. And so there are three main points that I just want to kind of summarize and wrap up, which connect to this. So if we are to practically look at the law of karma and see how it can help us in our lives, the first point is that we are all 100% responsible for our minds. You can't blame anyone, right? I am the one doing action. I am the one entertaining anger, pride, ego, jealousy. It's my jealousy, it's my anger. And that anger and jealousy and pride has an immediate effect. You know, it causes me to suffer. So this victim mentality, oh no, everything's so hard, I haven't done anything, it's all, life is so hard on me. That victim mentality in the law of karma, we don't have this actually. It's a very empowering thing to know that actually you can change if you want to. Of course, it requires effort and mindfulness, but we are responsible for our own suffering. We are responsible for our own happiness as well in that sense. The second point, which I want people to sort of take home, is obviously the division of what constitutes a good action or a bad action. So clearly actions which help others, which are rooted in compassion, lead to happiness. It leads to a happy state of mind now for you and for others. And it also leads to happiness later in the form of punya, which will come back to you later. Whereas actions which harm others will lead to suffering, right? So it leads to suffering now, mentally, for you and for others. And it also leads in suffering later in the form of papa, which fructifies later on. So that's the second point. You know, we should try and strive to be compassionate and kind and cultivate kindness if we want to live a happy life. It sounds really obvious, but still it's funny because we're all suffering in some way and we're all happy in some way. So it's a mix, but you can really lift yourself up out of this by imbibing the principle of compassion. And the final point I want people to take away, in order to really break free of this cycle, one must have a very calm mind and a mind which is very self-aware. So it's all about self-awareness. So there's a very hip term at the moment, mindfulness. So mindfulness is actually what one needs. Mindfulness just means being aware. Yeah, because unless you're aware of your actions, how are you going to correct your actions? And just the act of being aware of your feelings and actions also has an effect on your mind. And this awareness is a very powerful thing. It's not a simple thing. So this is a very deep topic, which perhaps we can discuss in future sessions, but mindfulness and awareness meditation practice is very key, actually, if we want to liberate ourselves from suffering.
Wow, Adityaji, thank you so much for that. And really breaking down the law of Dharma and really helping us understand this concept, this deep concept of Dharma. So thank you so much. And coming out here and taking your time to, go on this webinar. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone else as well that are watching this webinar, whether you're in the UK, whether you're out anywhere else in the world as well. So thank you for joining in and staying connected. It's been great. So last week we covered the law. We really looked at the 4 Vedas, and this week we looked at the law of Dharma. So thank you very much for that, Adityaji, and thank you to our students as well for really getting involved. I would like to talk about what we have going on in the next week. So Wisdom Wednesday, so today we had our webinar. Tomorrow, which is Tryout Thursdays, we've got our live public speaking session with Ajay. And then on Friday, we've got some banana bread making and Jana Masala. So please tune into that. Get involved, stay updated on our social medias, our Facebook, our Instagram. Please do share this link as well for those who couldn't make it onto this webinar. It would be really great to see what you have in the comment section as well. So continue commenting if you have any questions. But I would like to finish off on an please all get involved as well. So thank you very much for joining one last time. Namaste, Shubhratri. Om.